12 men made Black Cypress Camp, and 11 of them did not come out. Today is the 16th day of February 1827. We are in the record room attached to the office of the parish judge on Bayou Terrebonne, in the parish of Terrebonne, state of Louisiana. This is sworn testimony given under oath to the Special Commission of Inquiry into the Black Cypress losses, with the parish judge presiding. My name is Elias Mercer. I am 37 years old. I worked a trapline before I hired on as a woods guide, and I was paid to keep those men fed, oriented, and alive. The 27 links of iron chain lying on the table came out with me. Count them if you care to. When that chain pulled tight in the water, the small bones in my feet knocked together, though I was sitting down and neither heel touched the hull. That same knocking started 24 hours before the first man disappeared. Each man went separately. Each time, the camp felt the same number of knocks. There were 7. We left the Bayou Lafourche, landing on September 26, 1826. Our boat was the Belle Helene, a flat-bottomed fraught bateau of 19 tons. She measured 48 feet at the rail, 10 feet 8 inches across the beam, and drew 2 feet 1 inch when loaded. She had no engine. We moved her with 2 sweeps, setting poles, and a tow line when the bank allowed it. Our mission fit into one sentence: survey 640 acres south of Bayou Black, cut a winter road, and raise 8 shelters before the settlers' families arrived in December. The clerk has entered the men as presumed drowned or lost. That is ordinary language, and I understand why he used it. There was water on every side of us. A man can drown in 6 inches if he falls wrong, and a man who misses a cut through those marshes can walk until the ground gives out under him. But Lucien Vautrin did not fall. Silas Pike did not miss a cut. Nathaniel Red did not walk away from a roof he had promised to finish. Augustin Leblanc did not drown where the water reached, only to his belt buckle. There were 12 of us aboard. I will name the 5 men whose work matters most to the record. The other 6 were 4 axe hands and 2 laborers. Their names are already on the clerk's loss sheet, and I will not spend their families' names for decoration. Augustin Leblanc was the surveyor. He was 44, narrow through the shoulders, and exact with a compass even from a moving boat. His professional fault was that he believed a line could be made right if a man measured it often enough. Before every bearing, he tapped the brass lid of his compass twice with 1 fingernail. Nathaniel Red was our foreman and carpenter. He could look at a standing cypress and tell which cut boards would twist before spring. His fault was dry ground. If he found a patch that would hold a boot, he trusted it more than the water around it. Reed shaved 1 thin curl from every stake he drove, and kept the curls in his left pocket. Jules Boudreau handled the boats. He could read a cross-current by watching floating duckweed for half a minute. He tied good knots, but he tied every small craft to 1 master line because it saved time at departure. When he finished a knot, he wrapped the loose end once around his wrist and pulled. Silas Pike served as cooper and quartermaster. He could stop a barrel leak with a sliver of cane and the back of a spoon. His fault was that he blamed every loose hoop on wet weather. He used to put his ear against a cask and say, "Wood tells on water." Lucien Vautrin was our lead axe hand. He was 31, 6 feet even by the mark red made on the doorpost, and the best shot in the party after me. He kept the edge of his felling axe bright enough to show his eye. His fault was that he checked a perimeter alone. If another man offered to walk with him, Lucien would pat the axe and say, "I brought my company." My own competency was distance. I had gotten used to judging a deer through cane, a crossing through fog, and the length of a trail after water covered it. My habit was to tell the men, "Name the thing you know." My failure is already in the first line of this testimony. I was responsible for the route, and I brought 1 man out. We carried 8 axes, 3 crosscut saws, 2 augers, 6 smoothbore guns, 1 rifle, 1 keg containing 28 pounds of powder, and 164 lead balls divided between 3 wooden boxes. Our food was cornmeal, beans, salt pork, coffee, onions, and 2 sacks of rice. Pike had packed 12 days more than Red ordered. That extra food later kept me alive for 9 days, so I mention it. LeBlanc's instruments rode in a cedar chest lined with green cloth. He had a surveyor's compass, a folding rule, a brass plumb bob, field book, marking knife, 10 tally pins, and a gunter's chain. The chain was 66 feet long and made of 100 iron links. Each link measured 7 92 inches. Brass tags marked every 10 links. LeBlanc inspected all 100 at the landing. The Belle Helene also carried 3 pirogues nested across her deck. The largest was 17 feet 6 inches long and 2 feet 7 inches at its widest point. The other 2 were each under 15 feet. Boudreaux called them narrow as coffins. Reed told him coffins did not leak. Boudreaux answered that these did, and Pike put his ear to the largest hull as though it were one of his barrels. That was how the men spoke before the camp. Nothing in them expected a story. We made 9 miles the first day and about 6 the second. Low water slowed us where floating mats of cut grass and fallen limbs closed the cuts. Twice, all 12 men got into the mud and pulled the bateau by her tow line. The mud came to my knees. When we climbed aboard, Pike counted 11 men and shouted that somebody had been left behind. Then he grinned and pointed to himself on the bank. The joke had one use. After that, we counted at every departure. At midday on the 3rd day, we stopped at a narrow landing below the fork of Bayou Terrebonne. A fisherman named Baptiste Verret kept 2 sheds there, one for nets and one for salt. He was older than 50 and younger than 70. That is as close as I can put him. He could read water depth from the wet line on a cane pole, but he gave warnings in half sentences and expected strangers to supply the rest. His hands were broad, with the first joint missing from his right little finger. When he waited for an answer, his thumb rubbed that missing joint. Verret sold Reed 2 sacks of dried fish. He listened when Red described the ridge we meant to occupy. Then he asked LeBlanc which side of the crooked fork his line would cross. LeBlanc pointed south and west. Verret looked at me because I was the guide. He said, "If your feet knock and the ground stays still, you leave before the next dark." That was the warning. Those were his words. Red asked whether the ridge flooded. Verret said it did not. I asked whether there were bad men using the cut, because smuggling was not rare, and a camp full of tools could tempt anybody. Verret shook his head. "Not men," he said. I thought he meant an alligator on a trail, a sick bear, or one of the large cats people called panthers. I had heard French families use Loup-Garou for anything they wanted a child to avoid after sundown. Every settlement had a word like that. The word did not alter my route. Before we shoved off, Verret took hold of the Belle Helene's rail. "Not after the second dark," he said. "You understand the number." I told him we understood. We did not. The camp ridge lay 31 water miles below his landing. We reached it on October 1st, at 17 minutes past 3 by LeBlanc's watch. The ridge stood about 4 feet above the usual water, 700 paces long, and nowhere more than 110 paces wide. Live oak held the north end. Cypress and tupelo closed the south. Cane grew thick on the east side, while a dark cut of water passed within 40 paces on the west. Reed tested the ground with a 5-foot iron probe. He made 24 holes and found hard clay under 14. He chose the center rise for the main shelter. I wanted the north end because the oaks gave us a cleaner view, but it added 400 yards to the proposed road. Reed chose the center. Dry ground made the decision for him. By sunset, we had a cook fly, tool rack, powder platform, and 6 bed tents. Boudreaux tied the 3 pirogues to one 3/4-inch hemp line. That line went around a cypress root at the west cut. He wrapped the end around his wrist and pulled. Leblanc set a temporary meridian stake beside the shelter. He shaved no curl from it. Reed noticed, shaved one himself, and put it in his pocket. For 13 days, the work went as ordered. We ran 2 survey lines, cut 1,800 paces of path, framed 3 shelters, and raised the walls of a 4th. The men worked from first light until 1 hour before sundown. Every night I counted 12 heads. Every morning I found the boats on their line. We saw black bear sign twice, cat sign once, and alligator slides on every muddy bank. None came within 60 paces of the tents. The weather stayed warmer than it ought to have. Leblanc's small thermometer read 81 degrees at noon on October 13th and 68 before dawn. A north wind came late that afternoon. It lowered the air 6 degrees in 2 hours and pushed a skin of dead leaves against the west bank. At 8 minutes before sundown, I felt the first knock. I was standing at the north trail with both boots on dry clay. The knock came up through my left sole. It was not pain. It felt like somebody had struck the bottom of my boot with one knuckle from under the ground. My foot lifted before I decided to lift it. The second knock came through the right sole. Then both feet together took 5 more, spaced about 1 breath apart. 7 in all. The ground showed no movement. Water in a tin cup on a stump did not ripple. Lucien stood 20 paces away, working a whetstone along his axe. He stopped with the stone halfway down the edge. He looked at his boots, then at me. "You feel a root let go?" he asked. I said the clay had settled. The lie was small. It cost us because it gave Lucien permission to make his own answer. Leblanc came out of the shelter holding his field book. He had been seated with neither foot on bare ground. His boots rested on a split log floor 4 inches above it. Without asking what we felt, he set the book down and pressed both palms against the meridian stake. 7 movements, he said, south to north. Reed asked how far the stake had moved. Leblanc said it had not moved enough for his eye. Then he tapped his compass lid twice and took a bearing on the north flag. The line read the same as morning. Nobody had spoken to him about 7 knocks. Lucy and I had exchanged only 1 sentence. I noticed that at the time. I did not speak. The men ate at 6:30. Pike served beans with salt pork and complained that 1 water barrel had loosened 2 hoops. He put his ear against the oak staves. "Wood tells on water," he said. The barrel held 31 gallons when we arrived. It should have held 24 that evening. Pike dipped it and found less than 20. The ground beneath was dry. Reed said the men had drunk more because of the heat. Pike drove the hoops down and accepted that answer. At 7:15, Lucien took the north perimeter. He usually walked the full loop in 22 minutes. He returned in 17 and said the old cypress at the west cut had gained a blaze. I went with him to see it. The mark stood 6 feet 9 inches above the root shelf. It consisted of 3 short lines and 1 long line pressed into the bark. No chips lay below. An axe had not cut them. The bark had been compressed until sap shone at the edges. Lucien reached up with his axe handle. The long line began 4 inches above his reach. "Bear?" he asked. I told him a bear would leave curves from its claws and scrape loose bark. A cat could reach that height, but it would leave 4 close cuts and a different track below. We found no track larger than a raccoon's. Lucien patted the axe head. I brought my company. That was the second permission I gave him. I did not order 2-man watches. At 11 minutes after midnight, the 7 knocks returned. This time I felt them through my palms because both hands lay flat on the earth beside my blanket. They came in the same order. Left hand, right hand, right hand, then 5 through both. Across the tent, Lucien sat up. He did not call out. On the other side of the canvas, Leblanc's cot creaked once. The camp stayed quiet for 37 seconds. I know that number because I counted, waiting for an animal sound. At 38, something touched the west side of the shelter. It did not scratch. It pressed. The canvas moved inward about the width of my thumb, traveled along the wall for 9 feet, and stopped beside Lucien's bed. The pressure stayed there for 4 breaths. Then the canvas eased out again. Lucien took his gun from the floor. I put 1 finger to my lips. We sat for 12 minutes. Nothing else touched the shelter. Morning showed a clean strip on the canvas where mud had been rubbed away. The strip was 41 inches above the ground. It ran level for 8 feet 11 inches. No print stood outside it. The cane beyond the shelter had not been pushed down. Leblanc measured the mark with his folding rule. He entered the length and height in his field book. He used the words horizontal contact without settlement. Those were his professional words, not mine. Work started at 6:10. Reed sent Lucien and 2 axe hands north to extend the road. I followed at 7 with powder, wedges, and a water jug. The 3 men had cut 64 paces when I reached them. Lucien was looking at the ground. The new road held tracks from 3 pairs of boots. A 4th line ran beside them. It was not a print. Every 18 inches, the clay had a round depression about 2 inches across and half an inch deep. The line continued for 40 paces, always on Lucien's left. At one point, Lucien's boot tracks turned toward it. The round marks stopped. His tracks faced them for 7 feet. Then both lines continued. "I saw the cane move," Lucien said. Nothing came out. My order was for him to stay with the other 2 men. He asked whether I meant for the morning or the rest of the job. "For the morning," I said. At 3:40 that afternoon, I found him alone at the new boundary stake. The axe hands had gone back for a saw. Lucien said he would finish blazing the perimeter and meet us for supper. He held up the axe. The steel showed his right eye. "I brought my company," he said. Without answering, I walked back to camp. Lucien did not come to supper. At 6:04, I took 5 men north with lanterns. The sun had been down for 19 minutes. We found the boundary stake, Lucien's whetstone, and the axe buried 1 inch into a sweet gum trunk. The blade stood level, 4 feet 2 inches above the ground. His rifle leaned against the same tree with the hammer at half-cock. There was no torn cloth. There was no discharge. There was no drag mark. His tracks made 1 full turn around the stake. On the 2nd turn, his left heel failed to print. On the 3rd step after that, both tracks ended. The round marks continued south. They were 2 inches across, 18 inches apart, and too shallow for the weight they seemed to carry. I followed them for 109 paces. They stopped at the west cut, where the water was 3 feet deep. Leblanc held the lantern while I probed the bottom. Reed and the other men searched both banks. We worked until 9:20. Lucien did not answer his name. That was the first loss. When we returned to camp, the water barrel Pike had repaired stood outside the cook fly. It had moved 32 feet from its rack. The barrel was upright. Both hoops were still tight. Pike put his ear to the staves. "Empty," he said. At 9:23, 7 knocks rose through the soles of every man standing near it. Nobody slept after that. Reed put 2 men at the north approach, 2 at the south, and kept the remaining 7 under the cook fly. Leblanc suspended his plumb bob from a roof brace. He drove a small nail into the floor, directly below the point. At rest, the brass tip hung 1/8 inch west of the nail because the floor was not level. At 10:16, the knocks began again. The brass tip swung north and south. Leblanc held his folding rule beside it without touching the cord. The widest movement measured 3/8 of an inch from its resting point. 7 swings came through the line. Then it stopped. That was our first measured comparison. On the prior evening, LeBlanc had seen no movement in the meridian stake. On this night, his plumb line traveled 3/8 inch, the field he knew was surveying. He did not call it a tremor, illness, or weather. He entered repeated lateral displacement, north-south, 7 periods. I felt the motion in my jaw. My back teeth met once on the left, once on the right, then 5 times together. I opened my mouth to stop it. The bones still carried the knocks. It was the same force that had come through my soles, only higher. Across the table, LeBlanc pressed a folded rag between his teeth. Reed saw him do it. Augustin, LeBlanc took out the rag. "The same 7, he said. None of us had described the jaw to him. His answer made 10 men look at one another without moving their heads. Jules Boudreau stood up. He wanted the pirogues brought to the east side where we could see them from the cook fly. Reed agreed. Jules took 2 axe hands and carried the master line around camp. The 3 boats were still tied to it, but the largest pirogue sat backward. Its bow pointed into the bank. To turn that boat without untying it, somebody would have had to lift 17 feet 6 inches of cypress hull over the other 2. The mud showed marks from Jules's boots and the 2 men with him. No earlier tracks remained. Water had smoothed the bank. They dragged the pirogues across the ridge on saplings and secured them 21 feet from the cook fly. Jules ran the master line around 2 oak trunks this time. He made separate hitches for each boat. At the last knot, he wrapped the loose end around his wrist and pulled until the hemp creaked. Pike watched them work, then walked to the displaced water barrel. He rolled it toward the rack. Something moved inside. He stopped the barrel with his boot. Not empty. He removed the bung and tipped it. 7 brass tally pins slid onto the dirt. Those pins belonged in LeBlanc's cedar chest. Each was 11 inches long with a loop at the top. He counted them. 3 were missing from the set of 10. The chest latch was closed. The key hung from a cord inside LeBlanc's shirt. Red asked who had handled the pins. Nobody answered. LeBlanc washed them and laid them beside the plumb bob. Every pin was straight. The loops all faced west. At 11:40, Red ordered the camp into 3 watches. Pike and 2 laborers took the first. I lay down fully dressed with my rifle along my leg. At 1:12, a single knock touched my left rear tooth. The right followed. 5 came through the whole jaw. I sat up. Pike was whispering outside. I heard his usual sentence, but he had changed 1 word. "Water tells on wood," he said. One of the laborers asked what he meant. Pike did not answer. A barrel hoop struck the ground and rolled in a circle. It made 3 turns before falling flat. I reached the doorway in 6 steps. The 2 laborers stood beside the cook fire. Pike's lantern rested on the ground 26 feet away. Its flame was upright. His Cooper's mallet lay beside it. Pike was gone. The nearest water stood 40 paces west. We reached it in under a minute. No splash came. No boat moved. Both laborers swore Pike had been between them and the lantern. They heard his changed phrase, saw him bend toward the barrel, and then lost him when the hoop rolled through their line of sight. That hoop was 9 inches tall. It hid no part of a grown man above the ankle. We searched until first light. Pike's tracks ended at the lantern. A new set of round marks started on the far side of it. The marks ran east, away from the water, for 87 paces. They stopped at LeBlanc's meridian stake. That was the second loss. The stake was no longer in the ground. We found it under Reed's cot. LeBlanc had driven that stake 28 inches into clay. It measured 2 inches square and 5 feet long. The lower 28 inches still carried packed gray clay, unbroken around all 4 sides. No shovel cut showed at the original hole. The hole itself was full to the surface. Reed scraped the stake with his knife. One thin curl fell away. He put it in his left pocket, then stood with his fingers inside that pocket for a long time. At 7:10, LeBlanc reset the stake and repeated his north bearing. The compass needle settled 3 degrees east of the line he had recorded the previous morning. He checked the instrument against a second point. That bearing had shifted west by 2 degrees. "Both cannot be true," he said. He tapped the lid twice, opened it again, and obtained the same readings. I divided the 10 men. 8 searched with me, carrying 1 day's food, 4 lanterns, 2 coils of rope, and a pirogue along the west side. Red stayed at camp with LeBlanc to verify the survey line. Nobody went alone. Lucien's axe remained in the sweet gum where we had found it. His rifle remained against the trunk. Beyond that point, the round depressions showed on every patch of exposed clay. They never crossed our path. They ran beside it, sometimes left and sometimes right, at a distance of 9 to 15 feet. At 10:23, the younger of our 2 laborers saw a strip of blue cloth in the cane. Pike had worn a blue overshirt. We entered together, cutting a lane 8 feet wide. The cloth was not from his shirt. It was a 12-inch square from our folded boat sail, the one stored aboard the Belle Helene. Somebody had tied it around a cane stalk, 7 feet above the ground, with 3 turns of black thread. Boudreaux removed it. The knot was one he used for closing torn canvas. He did not deny that. "My hands made this," he said. "Not here, back at the landing, before we loaded." He showed me a shortened corner on the boat sail after we returned. The patch had been cut from that exact place. The cut edge carried 6 stitches of the same black thread. At 2:14, we stopped for food at the north boundary. Reed's group was visible through the cleared road, 320 paces away. LeBlanc stood over his chain. Reed held the forward tally pin. The chain lifted between them. It rose in the middle first, though neither man moved. 33 feet of linked iron came off the ground to the height of Reed's knee. The curve traveled toward LeBlanc, link by link. When it reached him, his hands opened. 7 knocks came through my jaw. LeBlanc's plumb bob, hanging from his belt, swung against his thigh. The brass tip hit him 7 times. I could see it at 320 paces because sunlight caught the metal. Then the chain fell. One of the 4 axe hands behind me said my name. I turned toward him. He stood between 2 men, holding a piece of cornbread. The jaw knocks ended. He was no longer between them. The cornbread lay on the path. The men on either side had not heard a footstep. Kane stood 8 feet away and did not move. We formed a circle within 5 seconds. I counted 9 men, then counted again. That was the 3rd loss. His right boot stood 21 paces back on the road. It was upright and still laced. The leather was not torn. Inside it, the sock had been folded into a square. We returned to camp at 3:05. I posted 2 men at each compass point with no more than 12 paces between them. Red wanted to resume the search before sundown. I refused. That refusal was correct. What followed it was not. At 4:20, LeBlanc repeated the plumb test. He used the same cord, brass weight, brace, floor nail, and resting point. 7 movements carried the tip 1 1/8 inches north and south. The change from the prior night was 3/8 to 1 1/8 inches. He wrote both figures in his field book. He underlined the second once. Then he pressed his fingers against the hinge of his jaw. LeBlanc asked for the full party at the meridian stake. 9 of us stood around him at 4:36. He had rerun 3 sides of the camp tract while we searched. The west line measured 8 chains and 40 links on October 12th. It measured 8 chains and 19 links that afternoon. The north line had gained 13 links. The east line closed 32 links short of its starting point. In plain distance, his 3 measurements disagreed by 13 feet 10 inches, 8 feet 7 inches, and 21 feet 1 inch. The stakes had not moved. Reed dug around too and found his original wood shavings buried beside them. LeBlanc called it a failure of closure. He checked the chain against the 66-foot calibration line he had cut into the shelter floor on the first day. The full chain still matched, end ring to end ring. "The instrument agrees with itself," he said. "The land does not return the line." Red told him land could not add and remove feet. LeBlanc tapped his compass lid twice. "I am giving measurements." He laid his field book on the table. Morning and afternoon bearings differed in opposite directions. A magnetic disturbance might pull a compass, he said, but it would not shorten a chain laid straight under tension. Heat might lengthen metal a fraction, but the afternoon air was cooler, and the difference was measured in feet. His professional finding was this: the closed traverse no longer closed. The error exceeded any correction for slope or chain temperature, and the displacement increased toward the west cut. I accepted what he measured. I did not order departure. 3 men were missing. Lucien might have been injured. Pike might have reached another ridge. The axe hand had vanished in sight of 8 men, but I still formed practical answers because practical answers gave us jobs to perform. We had boats, we had guns, we had food. The Belle Helene could take everyone out once daylight returned. Jules Boudreau wanted her loaded that minute. He stood beside the table with the blue sail patch in one hand. "We go now," he said. "High water or low. We pole in the dark." That was the first time he asked. I did not dismiss him then. I told him to prepare the vessel while I kept the men together. The decision recorded later came after the direct sighting, and it was mine, alone. Red assigned 2 men to carry food. Boudreau took 1 to launch the pirogues. I went aboard the bateau to inspect the powder and count ammunition. We had 147 lead balls and 24 pounds of dry powder. The missing sail patch did not prevent travel. The sweeps were in place. Both setting poles lay along the starboard rail. At 5:02, Reed called from shore. One of the food carriers had disappeared inside the storage shelter. The other man stood at the doorway. He said they entered together. He lifted a rice sack from the back wall, turned, and saw the second sack on the floor. The man who had held it was gone. The shelter had 3 plank walls and 1 open side. We removed the roof and searched beneath the raised floor. The missing man's hat sat inside the rice sack. That was the 4th loss. At 5:11, Boudreau shouted from the west cut. The 3 pirogues were gone. His master line still ran around both oak trunks. All 3 separate hitches remained tied. Each loop was tightened around empty space, the exact width of its boat stem. Boudreaux pulled one loose end around his wrist. The knot held its shape without holding anything. We found the largest pirogue after 9 minutes. It stood upright between 2 cypress trunks, 63 paces into water. Its bottom was 5 feet 4 inches above the surface. The other 2 boats were not in sight. No man could have lifted that hull alone. 6 men might have raised it with ropes from dry ground, but there was no dry ground within 40 paces. The bark on both cypress trunks was unmarked. Reed looked at me. The bateau. Now. We carried what we could. Food went first, powder second, water third. 8 men remained. The Belle Helene could be pushed into the West Cut in less than 20 minutes if the stern line came free. At 5:28, all 8 of us took hold of that line. The first knock entered my sternum. It felt like the breastbone had become the head of a drum. 1 strike landed on the left side of it. 1 landed on the right. 5 struck the center. My throat closed on each one, though I could still draw air between them. Every man's hands stopped moving. LeBlanc's plumb bob swung 2 3/4 inches from his leg. He caught the cord and watched the brass weight continue to turn below his fist. The change was now 3/8, then 1 1/8, then 2 3/4 inches. 7 measured periods, 3 days. The movement had climbed from the earth, through the jaw, into the chest. I should have spoken when Lucien first looked at his boots. Instead, I told him the clay had settled. That sentence belongs in the record because every order after it rested on the lie. At 5:30, the water in the cut drew away from the bank. It fell 7 inches in under a minute. Mud appeared beneath the bateau. Fish turned against the surface. The current did not run south or north. It ran toward the center of the cut, where something below made a line in the water 40 feet long. LeBlanc put one hand on my shoulder and pointed to the far bank. Something stood between 2 tupelo trees and watched us. The distance from the Belle Helene's stern to the far tupelo was 46 yards. I established that later from LeBlanc's west line measurements. At the time, I put it between 40 and 50 by the width of the cut and the length of our mooring line. The thing stood on a root shelf, 2 feet above the water. Its head reached a broken branch that LeBlanc later marked at 7 feet 5 inches. The crown looked level with that branch, sometimes an inch below when it shifted. I place its standing height between 7 feet 3 inches and 7 feet 5 inches. It did not have the shape people draw when they say wolf. The muzzle was shorter and heavier, closer to a farm dog seen through rain. The ears did not stand sharp. One lay back. The other turned toward us when Red spoke. Its shoulders were wider than Nathaniel Reed's by half again. Dark hair or wet hide covered them. I could not separate one from the other at that distance. The arms hung low enough that the hands rested beside the knees. I say hands because the ends opened and closed. A bear's forepaw does not open that way while it stands. At 5:30 and 12 seconds, it turned its head toward the north end of camp. Then it looked at each of us, not across us, at us one by one. Its head stopped 8 times. I counted the stops. Each lasted about 2 seconds. When it reached LeBlanc, it held 4. LeBlanc's right hand covered the brass compass against his chest. The figure shifted its weight onto the left leg. The movement was ordinary. A hunter does the same after waiting too long beside a deer trail. The right heel lifted, settled, and lifted again. My sternum answered each time. 1 knock came left. 1 came right. 5 came down the center. The men beside me bent forward without being told. Boudreaux kept his eyes on the far bank and said one French word under his breath. Loup-Garou. Reed told him to quit it. Boudreau did not repeat the word. He made the sign of a knot with his hands, crossing one finger over another, then lowered them. At 5:30 and 59 seconds, the thing reached behind the Tupelo. It brought out Leblanc's missing tally pins. 3 brass loops hung between 2 fingers. The pins were 11 inches long. Sunlight showed all 3. It held them at shoulder height and let them strike one another. 7 contacts came from 3 pins. The sound was light. The force in my chest was not. On the 7th, the stern line snapped tight and dragged the Belle Helene 14 inches through mud. 8 men were holding that line. Our boots cut trenches behind us. The figure watched the rope instead of the men. Then it took 1 step off the root shelf. The water received the foot without a splash. Its right leg entered to the shin. It lowered its weight as a man tests a rotten bridge plank. The head turned toward Boudreau. 1 hand opened. Boudreau's loose rope end was still around his wrist. I cut it with my belt knife. At 5:31 and 28 seconds, the 3 tally pins dropped. I saw them fall to the water. I did not hear them land. The thing moved behind the Tupelo, although the trunk was only 20 inches across. 1 shoulder passed out of sight. The head followed. The second shoulder should have shown on the other side. It did not. We held our positions for 18 seconds. At 5:31 and 54 seconds, Leblanc said the far bank was clear. The complete sighting lasted 1 minute 42 seconds. No shot was fired. I had the rifle in my right hand. Reed had a smoothbore. 2 other guns were loaded and within reach. The figure gave us clean aim for more than a minute. None of us raised a barrel. Action had stopped at counting, measuring, and watching. I counted the party. 7 men stood beside the stern line. The oldest axe hand had been between Red and Leblanc. Both men still had their hands spaced for his hands on the rope. A 6-foot section sagged where his weight had been. His gun lay on the deck. His boots were not left. There was no mark behind him. That was the 5th loss. Leblanc went to the Tupelo with me after the water returned to its earlier level. We crossed in the recovered pirogue. Reed and Boudreau held a safety line from our stern. I kept the rifle trained on the cane. The root shelf measured 9 feet long and 3 feet at its widest point. Mud covered it to a depth of 4 inches. We found our own boot marks, a raccoon's tracks, and nothing that matched what had stood there. The broken branch over the shelf was 7 feet 5 inches above the mud. Leblanc measured it twice. He cut a small blaze beneath it and entered observed height reference in his book. 3 brass tally pins lay in water 2 feet from the shelf. They had sunk upright into the mud, loops level with one another. Leblanc recovered them with his marking knife. He now had all 10. On the return crossing, Boudreau asked whether I believed his word. "Name the thing you know," I said. "It had hands." "That is enough," he said. It should have been. 7 men remained at 5:43. The bateau was grounded. The small pirogues were missing, and the large one would carry us if we kept low and left most equipment behind. Boudreau said, "We should go, right now." That was his refusal. He did not lose his judgment. He did not panic. He read the water, counted the weight the pirogue could bear, and told me the safer course. That was the only time I overruled him. I said we would wait until 6:10 for the water to lift the Belle Helene. The bateau carried enough food for the missing men if we found them, and its deck gave us room to hold a circle. I would not abandon 5 men without one final call along the North Road. That was the decision. Every later action came from those 27 minutes. Reed placed the remaining 2 axe hands on the deck, back to back. 1 laborer stayed with Boudreau at the pirogue. Leblanc watched his plumb line. I walked no farther than the meridian stake and called each missing man by name or role. No man answered. At 5:49, the north boundary bell rang. We had hung that bell from a stake so a distant crew could signal camp. It was an iron livestock bell 6 inches tall, and its sound carried half a mile in dry weather. The rope had been removed 2 days earlier because a raccoon kept pulling it. The bell rang 7 times. One axe hand on the bateau turned toward it. The second kept facing the water. Their shoulders touched. On the 7th ring, the man facing north disappeared. His partner fell sideways into the space. He caught himself on the rail. The deck below was solid. The water beside the hull held no disturbance. That was the 6th loss. At 5:55, LeBlanc's plumb line began to swing. It traveled 4½ inches from rest, still north and south. The nail below it worked loose and rose from the floor with each pass. On the 7th swing, the nail came out and landed point down. The remaining axe hand said something stood under the boat. We moved him from the rail. Reed took his left arm. I took his right. We kept physical hold while Boudreau and the laborer loaded the pirogue. At 5:58, the knocks entered my back and chest together. The soles, jaw, and sternum no longer felt separate. My whole frame carried them. The boat rail hit my palms with the same timing, as if the force came from the wood and from inside the bones at once. The axe hand was still between us after the 7th. Then a second set began without pause. On the 4th knock, his coat emptied. Reed and I held 2 sleeves with no arms in them. The shirt, suspenders, and pants fell in one bundle between us. His boots struck the deck. Nothing inside the clothing showed injury. Everything was fastened as he had worn it. That was the 7th loss. I am not certain of the order of the next 3 movements. I am certain of the following facts. Reed dropped the empty coat. Boudreau pushed the pirogue half into the water. The last laborer carried LeBlanc's cedar chest toward it. 7 knocks crossed the deck before he reached the rail. The cedar chest fell. The laborer did not. We found no part of him beneath it or overboard. That was the 8th loss. 4 of us remained. Nathaniel Red, Jules Boudreau, Augustin Leblanc, and me. The Belle Helene had not moved. Water along her hull had risen only 2 inches. 6:10 arrived with the bateau still in mud. Boudreau did not argue. He pushed the large pirogue fully afloat and held it while we boarded. We took 1 rifle, 2 smoothbores, the dry powder box, 37 balls, 1 water jug, 6 pounds of cornmeal, 3 pounds of pork, Leblanc's compass and field book, 1 axe, 2 setting poles, and the 66-foot survey chain. We left every shelter standing and the fire covered. Reed sat in the bow with a pole. Boudreau steered from the stern. Leblanc and I kept low in the middle. The pirogue rode with 3 inches of freeboard at the center. Pressure came from both sides. The north boundary bell continued at irregular intervals. Something walked the east cane at our speed. We never saw a body, only 1 stalk bending after another. Behind us, the Belle Helene's deck boards sounded under slow weight. We headed south through the West Cut because the North Passage was blocked by fallen timber. Boudreau said the current would join a larger bayou in 2 miles. From there, he could take us back toward Verrett's Landing. At 6:22, the cut narrowed to 12 feet. Red planted his pole on the right bank and shoved. 7 knocks moved through the pirogue. His pole stayed upright. Red did not. The bow rose when his weight left it. His setting pole remained planted in the mud and passed beside us like a mile marker. Leblanc reached for the shaft. I stopped him. We did not turn. That was the 9th loss. Boudreau moved to the middle and steered from 1 knee. He no longer wrapped rope around his wrist. When he made a hitch, he left the loose end free. The cut divided after 1,300 paces. He chose the right branch by the floating leaves. We had gone perhaps 400 yards when the pirogue stopped hard enough to throw me forward. The survey chain had paid overboard. One end remained fastened to the bow ring, where we had used it to lower the boat from the cypress trunks. The loose length had caught below us. Boudreau reached over the side and pulled. Iron rose out of the dark water, link after link. "Root," he said. He shifted his hand lower. 2 knocks struck through the chain. 5 followed. Boudreau's hands opened. The chain stayed in the air for a moment, with nobody holding it. Then it fell across the gunwale. The stern seat was empty. His black neckcloth floated beside us. His body did not surface. That was the 10th loss. LeBlanc and I drifted sideways. The pirogue could not pass the submerged route while a chain held its bow against the current. I took the axe and struck one link. The blade glanced off and cut the gunwale. LeBlanc removed his coat and boots. "Keep the bow straight," he said. I told him the water was too deep. He put one leg over the side. "It reaches my belt. I can lift the chain over the root. If I do not free it, neither of us leaves." That was the specialist's reason for staying. It was plain and it was correct. He entered the water with the marking axe tied to his wrist. The surface reached 2 inches below his belt buckle. He followed the chain toward the obstruction, keeping one hand on the links and one on the pirogue. At a distance of 9 feet, his feet found the root. He bent, lifted, and told me to pole. I pushed with both arms. The pirogue moved 3 feet. The chain tightened again. LeBlanc went under to his shoulders, came up, and shifted left. "Again," he said. I pushed. The bow crossed the root. 27 links came with the boat. The 28th opened at its weld. The remaining chain stayed with LeBlanc. Current caught the pirogue and turned it downstream. I put the pole against the bottom but found no purchase. In 10 seconds, 60 feet opened between us. LeBlanc stood waist-deep with the broken chain in both hands. He did not call my name. He struck the compass lid twice. The sound reached me through the 27 links lying against the hull. 2 light contacts. Then 7 blows entered the whole boat. On the last one, LeBlanc's lantern went out. I saw the water settle where he had been standing. I did not see him go. That was the 11th loss. I reached Baptiste Verret's landing 9 days later, on October 24th, at about 2 in the afternoon. The 2-mile cut Boudreau expected did not join the larger bayou. It divided 6 more times. I followed current, then followed sun, then tied up through 2 nights of heavy rain. Twice I passed the same white oak with a lightning scar, although I had taken different branches. The extra cornmeal and pork kept me moving. Pike's extra stores were the reason I arrived alive. Verret found me asleep in the pirogue with the rifle across my knees. He did not ask for the other men until he had pulled the boat onto mud. Then he counted the seats. 11 were missing, I told him. He looked at the chain in the bow. His thumb rubbed the missing joint of his little finger. "How many?" I said 27 links. He asked how many times the ground had knocked. I said 7. Verret carried me into the salt shed. Before sunset, he sent his nephew upriver for the parish constable. A search party of 19 men went to Black Cypress Ridge on October 27th. They found the Belle Helene, 4 shelters, the Cook Fly, 4 loaded guns, LeBlanc's cedar chest, and the north boundary bell. They found no person. The vessel had moved 112 paces inland from the West Cut. It stood level on dry clay with no skid path beneath it. The searchers cut rollers and used 2 teams of oxen to return it to water. Their report says the load exceeded what either team could start from rest. They found clothing arranged at the meridian stake. 11 garments lay in a circle, one belonging to each missing man and each folded once. Lucien's axe rested across the center. I did not see that arrangement myself. I give it only because 6 searchers signed the same inventory. No remains were listed. The search continued for 12 days. Men probed the west cut, dragged both banks, burned sections of cane, and followed every navigable branch for 15 miles. They recovered one small pirogue upside down in a cypress crown. The second was never located. The commission's clerk used the phrase presumed consumed by an unknown animal in his draft finding. That phrase is why people outside this room say the Loup-Garou ate the camp one man at a time. I did not witness feeding. I witnessed absence. Those are not the same claim. What survived is on this table. When Verrett and I first laid the chain straight on October 24th, it contained 27 links and one brass tally tag at the 20th link. A correct 27-link section should have measured 17 feet 9 and 84 inches. Ours measured 18 feet 9 and 9 inches. It was 11 and 1/4 inches too long. 5 links nearest the opened weld had been drawn out of shape. Their iron was narrow at the center and bright along the inner curves. No hammer face marked them. No tooth mark showed. The weld on the 28th link had opened without flattening either side. The parish surveyor examined the object on November 3rd. He cleaned the links, checked them against his own standard chain, and measured the section under 12 pounds of tension. His finding was 17 feet 9 and 84 inches by standard, 18 feet 9 and 9 inches as recovered, for an excess of 11 and 1/4 inches. He wrote that ordinary field tension could not account for the elongation and that the final 5 links had been extended along their long axis. That is the second measurement. It agrees with the first. The chain weighs 4 pounds 11 ounces. It is dry now. The 20th link tally tag is bent inward. 2 shallow marks cross its brass face at the same spacing as Leblanc's fingernail taps. Beside it lies the clerk's draft finding. In the margin next to the word animal, I added a refusal of 3 letters. It begins with N and ends with T. Put it on screen if a copy is ever made. I will not give the word a voice. It is preserved in this office under seal number 14. Its 27 links can be counted. Its excess can be checked. Its opened weld can be viewed from both sides. That chain cannot be made to say anything different from what it says. If the ground knocks 7 times beneath your feet, leave before it reaches your teeth. Do not stop to count the people behind you, make them move while they can still answer.